show, Revolution and Beer, revolutionandbeer.com, as I'm pouring a beer here. Check us out on Facebook at Revolution and Beer. Check us out. I'm going to pass this down to Maddie. We've got more beer on the way. Check us out on Facebook. Check us out at our webpage for the Beer of the Week, the Reactionary of the Week, some great video. Everything that's going on in the activist community here in Chicago.
Right-wing troll hunting.
That's it. That's it. I'm W.C. Turk. This is my my partner and cohort and co-host, Brian Murray. Hey, Brian.
Hello, hello, hello. Here's your beer, David.
Thank you.
And today, last week, we were talking beer, so we're gonna change gears here a little bit. You need some beer, pal.
Don't worry.
We're gonna switch to a little bit more of a serious note. Everybody good on beer?
Yep.
Our guests today are Maddie Sullivan, a local organizer and activist here in Chicago, and David Orlikoff, good friend of the show, and also an activist and organizer. And we're going to be talking about ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council.
Extortion Council. I want to just go ahead and get a switch to Extortion Council.
And it sounds, I need to top off my beer just a little bit. We're doing an Oktoberfest, which I guess is appropriate. We're also doing, you guys are doing an autumn ale. So as this airs, it's going to be the perfect timing for these beers. So basically, before we get started here, I just wanted to give a toast. Guys, thanks for joining us on the Revolution and Beer Show.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Cheers up.
And thanks for taking the blows for democracy, by the way.
Absolutely. This is the way to talk politics, over a beer. And you've earned it, both of you.
Yeah.
So we're talking we're talking ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which sounds like it sounds a little innocuous. It almost sounds
so sweet,
pleasant.
Yeah.
So,
happy and friendly, yeah.
We had a picnic and then went to visit ALEC. But it's nothing like that.
And their company penitentiary.
Exactly. I wanted to set something up. There was an anniversary party for ALEC this past August in
40
Chicago,
years.
Palmer House.
Yeah, 40.
40th birthday.
The Ruby.
And I wanted to talk narrative a little bit, just to get things started here a bit. That narrative is really important, not only in activism, but in people that are opposed to activism. And by activism, I mean people who are championing the rights of individual citizens, as opposed to large entities or powers or power elites.
The only rights we hear about usually in the media and the mainstream is the right of one person to take the rights away from another person, essentially.
Precisely.
Yeah, I'd say they champion the rights of an individual, but usually the individual at the top of the pyramid scheme, or a company or something that's basically trying to work.
This person has the right to create a whole bunch of bogus contracts and then enforce them with your tax money through your military and police against you.
Yeah,
exactly.
You don't have any
rights.
And
what we saw back in August was an effort to steal the narrative away from some of this substantive discourse about what's going on with ALEC, what ALEC is all about, and we're going to explain that here in just a moment, and why people should be concerned about who and what ALEC is and what they do. But there was an effort, or at least it appears that there was an effort, to steal the narrative away from that substantive discourse about something that really affects all of our freedom, that affects really the fabric of what we as citizens expect this country to be. It looked to me like very manufactured, a small number of very manufactured arrests. Some would say targeted arrests, unprovoked arrests, or at least they created the provocation, or the. And I know, not to give away too much here, but you guys got caught up in that. David, I think you were maliciously walking away from the event.
Yeah, using the public sidewalk.
Which is dangerous and subversive, all in its own right.
I'm not sure. I don't know. Yeah, I was arrested at the ALEC protest on August 8th. That's when we were protesting, and again, it was their 40th anniversary, which was not just a party for them, but was a working session for them. Which working for them involves lots of laying around in hot tubs with Dom Perignon for the 300 congressmen, and it involves the corporations giving them money, throwing a bag of money into the hot tub with the congressman, and then leaving a bill, on their nightstand for them to introduce into Congress next week.
Model legislation, I think, is that what they call
exactly,
it?
Exactly, right.
And Maddie, you got caught up in the middle of this by I think they're saying that you assaulted a police officer by allowing him to step on you.
You rolled under his foot.
You made the mistake of being too close to the sidewalk where he was stepping.
Exactly. It was,
and I know we're kind of making light of this a little bit, and I don't really mean to make light of it. I mean to be appropriately sarcastic, but I don't mean to make light of it because it's very serious. And we've actually seen a trend in which citizens, with their asserting their constitutionally protected, I guess we can put that in quotes these days, their right to redress and assembly. For things that are really affecting people legislatively, socially, culturally, economically, that we're seeing a rollback of those rights, and we're actually seeing a violation of those rights. And
that was definitely very important, to Occupy Chicago.
Yes.
I think, many, if not all, of the Occupy, movements. But here, we were a little different than a lot of other cities' occupations because we never successfully got an encampment. We were occupying our Wall Street, Jacksonville and LaSalle, the financial district where Board of Trade, Mercantile Exchange, the Bank of America, and the local Chicago Midwest Region Federal Reserve branches.
The places where you needed to make a point about some very significant injustices.
But we were getting support from so many people, people that couldn't make it out there were sending, food and clothing, and the people that were out there were just growing. We were seeing more people coming every day, basically, and that led to trying to take an encampment at Grant Park, and 175 people being arrested, and then the next week another 125 being arrested again. Those cases that went through the court system ultimately were ruled, the arrests were ruled unconstitutional by Judge Donnelly, but more than that, it's not just that the law that was unconstitutional was limiting the public use of the public park, which is ours, that we own. But beyond that, because anyone could have told you it was unconstitutional in that regard, the judge found that the police department acted with prejudice against Occupy Chicago because of our political beliefs.
Which is not supposed to happen.
Right.
No.
And we talked a little bit when we were coming up here. I was talking with you guys a little bit about there's a trend towards statuting away our constitutional rights. That these and we hear on the right quite often. And again, I'm going to throw this out. Representative Joe Walsh, you need to be on this show. So bring it on, pal. But you got some things we need to talk about. And you know what they are. So don't dodge us. That's just have some guts. Get on this show. Let's have a debate. But what we're seeing is. Sorry, that's just me.
I want to see it too. Yeah. We're calling you out.
But what we're seeing is that that cities and police departments, and I don't want to specifically call out the police department per se, because it's part of a larger system or it's a systemic issue.
Certainly.
But what we're seeing is they feel that they can alleviate us of our constitutional rights with these little petty statutes.
Yeah, and I mean, even like in the suburbs of Chicago and like the smaller neighborhoods, you see suburbs like Occupy Naperville and people Occupy out in the suburbs, and we see it with we can protest on this square, you can't go to that square, you have to be 2 feet to the left that way or 2 feet to the right that way. Or use the bullhorns.
It's harassment.
It is.
It's harassment. It's petty.
One of the things that I'll never forget about Occupy Chicago is how the police were constantly playing games, trying to get you to slip up. And I kind of have a feeling that when this whole ALEC situation gets broken down and goes through court, we're going to see something very similar. It sounds like they were moving the barricades back on people, pushing people back into the opening of the Palmer House so that you're on the public sidewalk, and then, they were just waiting for an excuse to come across and beat the crap out of people. I'm sorry, but that's pretty much what I witnessed, and Bill was still down there when it happened. We've got video, we've seen photos. We'll have
I still don't know what the excuse was, because the police on the scene didn't communicate one word with anyone.
Someone said something about a barricade being moved by a protester. It's the only thing that I've heard of all the people that I've talked to about that.
Doesn't bear that out.
The video I've seen, I at the point when they start attacking the protesters, there's a phase. Okay, so one thing that's great about ALEC is that they're involved in everything, right? They are doing for-profit prisons, privatizing education, eliminating the minimum wage, stand your ground, but they're doing all this. So it really has an opportunity to bring the left together.
And that's a great
in
point.
opposition to ALEC.
So before we get into the details a little bit about the arrest,
I think they do that to keep us separated. There's a real power.
Tell folks a little bit about ALEC.
Exactly.
You guys are very well spoken about it. So tell people what ALEC is first of all.
Okay. ALEC stands for the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's a mix of corporations and legislators, senators, representatives that come together. And these corporations, they write model legislation, and then they meet with legislators.
But the legislators that are part of this don't come to ALEC as part of with all these corporations as a means of, let's all put our collective heads together and come up with something interesting. They're there to serve a purpose. How does that hierarchy work?
Well,
who writes that legislation?
The corporations write the legislation. Not just that, but they write the talking points that the politicians then are supposed to go and sell the ideas to their constituents or whoever to. It's the exact inverse of what democracy or even a representative republic would be. We don't have policies coming from the people through the elected representatives. We have policies coming to the elected representatives from the powers that be, and then being kind of manufactured consent, being forced on the population.
And why do you think that's an issue? So corporations write legislation, and they give it to various elected officials. Why is that? Why should people be concerned about that?
I think we could separate it into multiple grievous issues. I mean, on the one hand, if you just look at the bills that they're passing, these are the worst, most destructive bills that our country's seen in the last 40 years.
Aggressive, in
right?
A lot of ways.
Yeah,
there are more people in American prisons today than in any country in the history of the world. Far more than the Soviet gulags, and there are more black people in American prisons today than were enslaved in America, and most for nonviolent drug offenses. Let's just say pot possession is the number one lockup, and that's disproportionately impacting people who are stop and frisked every day of their lives rather than but there are just as many people that look like us possessing weed and not being locked up for it.
Which we should point out that the majority, about 60% of all people that are affected by stop and frisk all over, but these statistics come from New York, so this is just an aside, are black or Hispanic. And
like 96% are non-white, and 95% are innocent.
Are innocent, completely innocent of anything. So there's very definitely a racial component to this.
Absolutely.
So that was a point that I kind of digressed from before that I wanted to get at. That as the authorities are coming around and shaking up Occupy, they're throwing different statements about what they can and cannot do. And Occupy's running around finding the actual ordinances and learning them and finding out exactly what they're teaching themselves and others exactly what the law is. Where do you see that happen in this country on a regular basis? That was pretty amazing. We had the roundup during the Iraq War of all the protesters along Michigan Avenue. We've had all these various, or it was Lakeshore Drive.
That was very expensive for our city.
Right.
Yeah.
So all you
$6
tax
million.
hawks out there who I just want you to think about the situation that we're dealing with court cases and fees related to trying these cases, lawyers and all this other stuff, but people who are simply expressing themselves through the legal, constitutional way that they can. So if you want to beat up about where your tax dollars are going, you want to complain about that, maybe you should consider stopping this total suppression of people who are actually trying to take up for themselves as working class people. Just a thought.
Dave, Dave, hit us with some of the things that ALEC is doing that's regressive for.
Well, going on right now, is the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington,
Yes.
and Martin Luther King, before he was assassinated, became very vocal about economic issues as being, the primary issues. We're not going to have equality. We're not going to have a realization of any dream in this nation without addressing, the extreme economic inequality. That has not happened over the past 50 years. Instead, we've had a doubling down. Wages for 90% of the population have decreased, especially if you account for inflation. And
I think there was a little bit of a bump maybe in the last couple of years, but it's very small. And it didn't compare to inflation at all.
Right.
Actually, so.
And, well, it was, in the last 40 years, I think median income has gone down 4% if you account for inflation, but that's only the price index inflation. But most inflation is asset price inflation, which is healthcare, housing, and education. And those have triple or quadrupled the pace of the price index inflation, but that's everything you need to live and to survive and get ahead, and play the game, right, so to speak. So, so inflation is really much more than is reported. And inflation is really a tax that the people pay to the banks because the private banks are creating our currency and we're borrowing it from them. But the reason I brought up MLK was because of right to work. And MLK came up with the phrase right to work for less. That's his branding of these laws, which roll back minimum wage requirements, which saved our economy, after Reagan tanked it. The minimum wage is what brought us back for a little bit into like Clinton's heyday. But so we have these same laws that were being pushed through in the racist civil rights era called right to work, and they're the exact same laws now being presented by ALEC 50 years later. And all they do is take out all labor protections, have people work more than 40 hours, have kids working, why not, Why have any health care? Your worker dies, you get a replacement because there's such high unemployment that, there's a line outside your factory. That's where we're going. We're going backwards in time.
It's very much similar to, the modern day equivalent of when we saw at the beginning of the labor movement at the early part of the 20th century, in which they would bring poor blacks or immigrants and camp them outside the gates of factories as an implicit or an explicit threat to the workers against organizing in unions.
Definitely.
And I thought it was really hilarious when one of the Koch brothers, I guess, published a piece a few months back about how if we just eliminated minimum wage, we could fix everything. And it's just like, okay, let's just go ahead and put. It's kind of like looking at the woman who gets abused and saying it's all your fault. And it's this idea that you eliminate any responsibility or connection to a community or even a nation by the corporate citizens that exist in that area, and that they can just constantly push prices on everything. And costs totally through the floor without regard for the quality of life of the people that work for them. And I think that's, to me, when I look at ALEC and the things that they try to pull off, that's one of them that I see that jumps out to me, and that they would just prefer that we were all living in company towns circa 1890 or something. And
or 1935.
And there's some other things, they have to roll back to get there, like public education as well.
Exactly. Control the public education, control what's taught, make kids more compliant, answer tests.
Controlling the message.
Exactly.
I mean, the Gates Foundation is advocating basically for computer programs to replace teachers. Rahm Emanuel pushed for the longer school day, but has cut budgets, 2 years in a row so that they can't implement any programs.
Where were
for
you when the
day.
robots took over?
And now they're talking about doing gym online in CPS. That's being discussed. And
doing gym
exactly
online.
Not sure that'd work all that well, but
it's called a Wii.
I wanted to ask you guys because when people talk about ALEC, when people talk about this sort of thing, they talk a lot about all the points, and the points are important. What sort of things, maybe like campaign finance, what sort of things begin to change this narrative away from corporations writing legislation that benefit corporations to the detriment of citizens, as opposed to citizens groups like unions or social groups that work for people, for the individual. What do we do to begin? And if we don't get to it, we're going to continue this conversation because this is important for another show in the next show. But just to get your thought here going towards the end of this half hour, what do we do that begins changing this narrative so that people start getting control of their government?
I think one thing, one big thing, especially if you know what we saw at the ALEC protests, the response from the police, is kind of was holding people accountable. Because too many times, police go into court, and there's cases against them for police brutality, and they get off. And I've seen it multiple times, and they'll try to, as a group, bring up either a lawsuit or the lawyers will go after the police, and nothing comes of it. And on top of that, I think holding politicians accountable for what they do. Too often, just like police, they can pull off fraud, they can pull off all types of scandals, and it's in the news, and then they make a public apology.
Participate.
And,
people need to participate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they're going to lose if they don't.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I'd like
you
to.
Can't win if you don't.
You can't
play or don't fight. We're all in the game. You didn't sign up for it, but
you're in it.
You're fighting, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
It's
the class war.
To sort of add on to the question and move forward a little bit, one of the main points that's being made of the sort of community that's opposed to the sort of backdoor deal making and things related to ALEC is saying about what happened here in Chicago is that there were thousands of people that came out and put on a show. I mean, basically called attention to ALEC, and that hasn't happened before. So obviously one step towards getting access and taking back some of the control over our policy, our public policy, and getting it to favor us more than, the power elite business owners that are, have got millions of dollars to wine and dine our politicians to get the exact legislation that they want. Is first you gotta draw attention to them. These guys have been scurrying around in the dark, like a bunch of rats for a while, getting away with this stuff. So that's considered to be a huge step forward.
And there have been strides made. CMD is a group that's been hounding ALEC, for a few years, and they succeeded just recently, I think, in the last year,
the Center for
getting
Media
the model
Democracy.
bills. Exactly. They succeeded, thanks for pointing out, in getting the model bills that ALEC, is pushing in all these different states and nationally public. So if you look at alecexposed.com, you can see all the bills that ALEC is currently advocating for. And ALEC recently shut down 2 of their task forces on bills that were so unpopular, which was voter ID laws, which there is no voter fraud in America. There've only, there've been less than a dozen cases prosecuted in like the last election cycle. But they're passing all these laws to make people that had trouble voting before civil rights, unable to vote again. So again, it's the same thing we talked about, really rolling back to what Martin Luther King was talking about.
And that's important. At the end of our show, we're going to have all the contacts. We're going to have more information that we'll post with the credits about how people can get involved and get informed in this issue. They need to get informed in this issue because it's important to them. It's affecting them, whether they acknowledge it or realize it right now. It's affecting them. And we also want to hear from people. We want to hear from you, and we want to receive your feedback about what you think about this issue, what you think needs to be done in order to turn this around and make a difference here. We don't win anything by staying separate. We need to get people together on this. This is the fight. This is the time. This is the moment that we have to get active before this gets away from us.
That's a really key point. And I think one of the
We're at a
great things
crossroads
about
here.
ALEC,
Exactly.
for people that want to organize Fight for Change, the best thing about ALEC is that they're involved in everything bad
Brings
that's going
everyone
on.
together.
You know, it brings everyone together. You have a group of people that are saying we can't focus on anything else other than the environment because that's a doomsday scenario that we need to address right now. But you have other people saying, well, I'm not interested in any struggle that's not addressing the systemic racism in America. And it's like, well, where are we going to come together? ALEC. And then getting to what you said at the
they're attacking
beginning.
Unless you're a wealthy banker watching the show right now, in which case, yay, ALEC. But seriously,
And the police response, I think the police response had a lot to do with trying to drive some kind of wedge in the unified opposition that we saw there against ALEC.
divide everyone.
Just make something big happen to see, if some people get more scared or if they respond to it differently. Just create a division in the people. A trauma. It's a trauma. When the police attack a group of protesters, they inflict a trauma, and it has psychological impacts, and it affects the work we do.
And it costs taxpayers dollars.
It does.
I want to stay on this. A quick check from Ben, our director here. How we're doing on time?
We got 2 minutes. Oh, we got 1 minute.
No, we're getting to the end of it.
So well played on doing the second part. On
We
this
got
one.
another episode, though, right?
Another episode.
At least.
So don't change clothes. Don't sit in. Don't move anywhere. We're going to stay here for an entire week and then come back for the next. But
We're rolling out the colostomy there.
but it's really important. This is really a critical issue, and it's affecting all of us. It's affecting our lives. It's affecting our freedom.
It's reshaping the way that our country is wired.
That's
it's
a brilliant
really,
point.
It's really restructuring the way that our government
Our expectation
functions.
of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And what the Constitution is supposed to be.
And I wouldn't put it past them to actually try to change the Constitution based on the ideas that they're going after either. And this is why we need to be aware of it.
They've got the infrastructure in all the states for a Congress or whatever to pass.
Well, that's a good point that they go state by state, and maybe we'll revisit that. As far
And
as
in our book, Tomfoolery, which is out now, and
not a
people
guy
can
from
get
Texas.
Yeah. Tomfoolery is not a guy from Texas. Riffs and rants and a post-Republican America, but. We talk about activism in America, and that activism has really shaped and defined the Constitution. We need to do that. So let's hold you guys over. I'm going to do a quick toast here. Here's to the holidays, guys.
Oh, 365.
And thank you for joining us.
Sorry.
We're going to hold this over. We're going to continue this conversation, folks. We will be back we'll be back in a week.
RevolutionBeer.com.
Stick with us. RevolutionBeer.com.
You know, like what we're saying? Want to disagree? Email us.
Good man.
And I'm just waiting for the catalyst. I'm waiting for the change, 'cause it's gonna come. Yeah, it's gonna come. They've been saying it for years, for years and years and years, for years and years and years. And I'm so caught up on it. I'm so caught